by our working group of construction contracts, and second, to take advantage of this opportunity to talk with our panelists about what is behind the strong increase in prices in recent years and the way in which the industry players have been resolving or not their difference on this point. As a way of introduction, I would like to briefly refer to our position paper called Increases Price and Possible Ways Forward for Construction Contracts. This document will be available on the CICA website in the coming days. As has been usual in the latest documents prepared by this working group, the objective of this position paper is to raise the topic in a simple and direct language, to motivate the different stakeholders in the industry to reflect on the issue and implement what they consider useful in their processes, contracts, and dispute resolution models. In simple words, the basic question here is, what do we do with the extraordinary increase in construction prices that has occurred in recent years after the pandemics and international conflicts that apparently are far to end in the short term? In order to promote a conversation on the matter, the document proposed a diagnosis and possible solutions to be implemented in 3 stages: tender process, project execution phase, and dispute resolution. Maybe it's possible that the diagnosis could be broader, of course, or that there are more possible solutions or precise solutions. However, the important thing here is to promote the conversation and find solutions. In particular, we are convinced that the current risk balance of construction contracts must be reviewed. If this situation implies an adjustment of some clauses or a complete re-study of the contractual framework, that is something that must be discussed by different experts. And speaking about experts, 3 great experts are with me, each one in different arena. Our first guest is Mrs. Yasemin Cetinel. Yasemin is a founding partner of Cetinel law firm in Istanbul, specialized in international construction law, international investment, and commercial arbitration, with a specific focus on construction disputes. She has a broad experience as a board member and arbitrator in construction disputes, is a graduate of Galatasaray University, candidate on the master degree for quantity surveying and Heriot Watt University, is part of my team of technical lawyers, and she holds a postgraduate degree in international commercial arbitration from the Queen Mary and Westfield College, University of London. Finally, as you know, Yasemin is past president of Region 2 of the Dispute Resolution Board Foundation, and she was one of the drafters of our position paper. So welcome, Yasemin. It's good to have you here.
Hello, thank you.
Our second guest is Mr. Richard Bailey. Richard is partner and head of construction and engineering at Bruce LLP, one of the oldest firms in the City of London. Richard has been the chairman of the Society of Construction Law in UK and European Society of Construction Law, and regularly lectures internationally. He's a highly experienced litigator as well, has been involved in complex contract drafting and negotiations. So Richard, it's good to see you again. Thank you.
Good to see you too, Alex.
And last but not least, we are joined by Mr. Vincent Leloup. Vincent is the chairman of the FIDIC Contracts Committee, FIDIC Certified Trainer and Adjudicator, and member of the FIDIC President list of adjudicators. He's a professional engineer by trade with strong legal qualifications, with more than 25 years of experience in more than 50 countries. Vincent regularly serves as a dispute board member in construction projects across the world, as arbitrator as well, expert witness. He is co-drafter of the FIDIC 2017 Suite of Agreement, principal drafter of FIDIC Green Book version 2021, founder and director for study of the LLM International Construction Contracts at Paris Panthéon Assas University. Vincent, thank you very much for participating. So,
thank you very much, Alex.
Thank you. So I would like to start by asking Richard about some legal aspects involved in the conversation. So my first question, Richard, is could you give us a general overview about what was discussed in different countries and under the legal perspective when, as a consequence of the pandemics and the next global events, the prices of plants and materials start to increase?
Yes, Alex. Just first of all, thank you for the invitation to speak. It's wonderful to be part of such a panel, and I feel somewhat in awe of the other two speakers. They're far better than I am. That being said, I'll try my best. How long do you want this answer to last? I'll tell you why, because I actually, fortuitously probably, was involved in a presentation, so there's credit to a lot of other lawyers from other jurisdictions in some of the things I'm going to be saying, where we were dealing with unforeseen circumstances in various different nations' laws. So I'm going to heavily plagiarise a paper that they prepared. Fortunately, I haven't seen any of them on this list, but the purpose, I think, just the general overview, and I'll do this quite quickly, about the whole issue of prices of plant materials in different countries. I actually was looking at, there is a bit of a difference between those sort of cutthroat common lawyers, of which I am one, and the more civil law practitioners, of which I was. So, and I was looking at some of the notes I had from this, and countries that apply, and it was force majeure seemed to be coming up a lot when we were having this previous discussion. Unforeseen events, which for those who know the English common law, force majeure, apart from being not an English phrase at all, is not defined under the English common law. So that makes life very difficult when trying to deal with things like COVID, but also very useful. But if you're sort of one of the Napoleonic civil law countries, then force majeure does seem to come up far more often, and they have the whole idea of it, which we define into some forms of contract. I think there'll be no doubt mention of FIDIC when it comes to force majeure, but from those guys, and I was looking at what do other countries say. So I had the countries that I found some notes on from the previous talk, where it started with Italy, which has a specific article to deal with these kind of issues, which determines where there's been a temporary impossibility, such as COVID, to perform the contract. The parties are entitled to an extension of time for completion at no additional cost. That's within the Italian Civil Code, Article 1256, apparently, of the Italian Civil Code. A contractual termination can be claimed also in the event that extraordinary and unforeseeable events have rendered performance of a contract excessively onerous or difficult to perform, or if they're unable to negotiate it. But things such as COVID and so on, the costs of that are matters for contractual negotiations. Excuse me, I keep having a bleep, and that's actually people joining the meeting, so do apologise, it's coming through speakers. And there's also a remedy within for renegotiation as well. Although there's not an Italian Civil Code specific rule establishing a duty to renegotiate, there is an argument that it's a matter of good faith. Now, also going back to the English lawyers, unsurprisingly, common lawyers do not have a duty of good faith, which might explain how we sometimes act in negotiations. But we don't have that ultimate duty of good faith within any of the law, although there's attempts in some jurisdictions, any draft it into contracts. So there is a degree within Italy for provisions. They've also got a new public contract code, which came into effect in July of last year, which established the inclusion in tender documents of a price revision clause. So that's quite an interesting one for them. I then went into the Germans, or Germany, and there's no statutory law defining force majeure, but they do recognise them, and many contracts contain force majeure clauses. And in particular, I found section 313 of the German Civil Code that stipulates that if the circumstances forming the basis of the contract has significantly changed, the contract may be amended, if possible, or terminated if one of the parties cannot reasonably be expected to uphold the contract. So there's provisions within the German Civil Code there. In addition, there's also the good faith principle, section 242 of the German Civil Code, which says an obligor has a duty to perform according to the requirements of good faith, taking customary practice into consideration. So the Germans have a good faith provisions. I did find a very, very short comment in the USA, which is basically very similar to the UK. We tend to treat things like COVID, or wars, or things like that, unless they're an insurance event, as a sort of force majeure event, which is going to be time and prevention. If it's in the sort of common law, you're going to more likely come across a doctrine of impossibility, where the contract's impossible being completed and frustration of the contract, where the original purpose of the contract has been frustrated. Just quickly on the French law, which I did find something on, which Vincent will, if I get this wrong, I've copied it from a French lawyer, so he will correct me. Unfortunately, I haven't found anything on Turkey, but I did notice in the paper the reference to the Turkish Civil Code. There's Article 1995, recognising the doctrine of hardship in French private law. So that has where hardship creates a right to renegotiate a contract upon the accounts of certain particular circumstances that have there. Finally, on these, just Finland was the other one, which slightly strangely, slightly out of place, but there they sort of take a commercial approach to these kind of renegotiations. What interested me slightly was that when I was looking about the freedom of bargain that we common lawyers also commonly like to rely upon, I found that we had something in common with one civil code country, which was some microphones come on. There we go. Where the Austrians have the same freedom of bargain and freedom to stab each other in the back as the English common lawyers have. So that seemed to be so. But I did also want to note, just on that cost thing, that one of the key things I found with COVID and supply demands, and obviously in the UK we did have quite a while where we kept referring to Brexit as well as a cause of problems, even though we actually had no laws on import that controlled imports anyway at Brexit, but apparently it was still a problem. That did create problems with supply chain. And the biggest thing I've actually found with this was because of, and this may be part of the tendering and procurement processes, because we live in a world of just-in-time deliveries to sites. Once you have an event like COVID, where countries are closed down, borders are closed, and we rely upon a global system of trade. So no doubt to what the law of the contract is, this global trade. One of the key fundamentals happen, especially if you operate in a country which does not have much of a manufacturing base anymore, aka the UK, imports are all important. When you have borders being shut, when you have problems with people actually bringing goods into the country, you have these supply chain injuries. And you also have problems with manufacturing, which then as soon as the things were lifted, that's when the real problems, in many respects, happen, because then you had high inflation because of dealing with the fact that the supply chains were not able to operate properly, material supplies were not getting through, backlogs of things, and therefore you start again. Now the contracts, I won't mention FIDIC, was Vince here, but they had a note on that. But the JCT and the NEC4, which are used extensively in the UK, one has a fluctuation provision, which is in the JCT specifically for dealing with price increases, although in reality, in 99% of all construction contracts entered into in the UK where a lawyer's been involved, that fluctuation clause is struck out. And it's a fixed price, and we don't want to talk about any of these issues anymore. But also in the NEC, they have the core clause 19, which creates a potential relief for these kind of things. And just looking at the figures, the commercial figures, which are since 2020, build costs have increased in the UK by 24%, and material costs have risen by 43% in the last 2 years. None of those, so much of that has had to be costed in. And actually, I have clients who actually hedge material costs now. So especially in mechanical and electrical side of things, or steel, they're hedging their costs. So when they actually placing a tender, submitting a tender at the time of tendering, as soon as they've been awarded, even if they're not going to start that bit of work for a couple of years, they're hedging the costs and placing the orders for a couple of years in advance, fixing the prices so that they get control. The problem sometimes their subcontractors do not have that ability. They get hit by the high prices, and it's why we've had such a spike of insolvencies across the construction industry as well. So that was a bit of a long-winded answer, but.
Thank you, Richard. And you set on the table very interesting concepts. You talk about the difference between common law and civil law, the concept of force majeure, hardship, the role of good faith. We have seen in the private sector that there are concepts that are here, but in terms of public policies, we have seen governments ensuring compensations to the contractor if the contractor demonstrates the loss, irrespective of the contractual provision. Do you have an opinion regarding that?
Yeah, just a brief one, and this is a Anglo-centric version of it, so the UK approach to things, because we don't really have, apart from tendering processes, which have obviously changed slightly because we've left the European Union, so we don't have to be part of the OJEC, but we still have a similar process for public procurement. The government doesn't have the same protections it has in many other countries in the world. It's subject to the same clauses, the same dispute resolution provisions, openly can be sued in court. They don't have the protection. If anything, if they go to court, they're probably in trouble because the judges who are highly independent will probably fight against them. So what I think what's happened with the government is, because during that COVID period, they basically threw money at things. So lots of public money being pushed into these projects. It did cause delays. We've had some major infrastructure projects, two I can think of, Crossrail, which was very heavily delayed in part because of those issues, around several £billion over budget, but the government's paid. And our other big project that's been affected by these kind of things, public procurement, is High Speed 2, the rail link, which started out with a budget of £35 billion and has hit 100 billion before they decided to rein it back in. The UK government basically pays for anything that increases on these kind of procurement things. They do try, and I'll have one example of something where inflationary costs and public money is not being put in. We are presently building a new nuclear power station in the UK, Sizewell B, if I remember rightly. And that's being built by EDF, the French government electricity company. And under that contract, which has spiraled out of, doubled in price, EDF are liable for all their cost increases. And they're arguing with the British government now about the fact that they're refusing to pay a lot of those price increases for overrun material costs, etc. And we're talking somewhere in the region of, it was 15 to 20 billion pounds. At last count, there was over budget and they were refusing to pay for it. So, but generally the governments tend to just throw money at the issue.
Perfect. Interesting. Thanks, Richard. Moving forward, the project execution phase is essential, and the avoidance via collaborative contracts or collaborative tools is today in the center of the hot topics in terms of management. So, via Yasemin, in terms of conflict avoidance related to the increasement of prices, which was the role and the added value that you've seen in the dispute boards during the pandemic?
A very good question, and I really have an answer for that, which is even better. because in the last 2 years, we basically experienced just this and very heavily. But before that, maybe procedural question. Richard has mentioned so many interesting things. Shall we wait at the end of the discussion to re-evaluate some of the points? Because really, coming from the common law perspective, these dynamics are different than a totally continental law practice over Middle East. So I'm going to just say my comments for the end, and I'll start with the dispute board's role in this, global event, let's say.
Perfect. Okay.
So first of all, maybe I should start with when the pandemic era started. So of course, everybody was just caught, surprised, and we had to find our way professionally and also as construction sector in terms of adaptation. However, if everybody remembers, there was a time of real force majeure impact in terms of impossibility to work, if you remember. So we couldn't get out of our houses. However, at that stage of the pandemic, not post-pandemic, but during pandemic, the first thing I would like to mention is that dispute boards also adapted themselves very fast to the process, as probably other parts of the dispute resolution. However, especially the contracts that were already having the dispute boards, I think had better chance in that adaptation stage. And also as DRBF, we were very fast and we have circulated our guidelines in order to be active during the pandemic era. And maybe we will have chance to consider the post-pandemic era very shortly. That activeness at the outset of this, unforeseeable event, and keeping the boards alive via online means, keeping the site meetings online, and because in most of the cases, the construction works themselves continued to the extent possible. However, the consultancy part, the supervision parts kind of jobs had to stop. In most jurisdictions, there were specific permissions for important infrastructure works to continue, whilst there weren't such approvals for other businesses. So the first point that I would like to make, we survived as dispute board process practitioners, which was a good thing afterwards. And perhaps I could elaborate, whether or not as DRBF we had any insights and lessons learned about this, whole experience of adaptation. So once we were getting out of our houses, we were then caught by this global economic crisis this time, coupled with the, of course, the Russia-Ukraine, conflict and then war. And those who kept and who activated their dispute board processes in the pandemic were able to move forward quicker than others, because obviously you are hit by financial problems. And I will just in a minute elaborate that part as well, because those contracts were executed after a long stability period, worldwide. They did not have these price adjustment clauses. So the parties to the contract were really caught and hit by the increases in prices. And I would like to say parties, because although the direct impact is on the contractor, as Richard was stating, If you are losing your contractors to insolvency one after the other, employers are losing as well. This is a construction sector loss and not only a contractor's loss, so it should be intervened. And although the contracts did not have these mechanisms, the ones with the dispute boards were able to resort to their boards fast to get an opinion or recommendation or decision whether or not there should be an adaptation right for the contractor to put the project out of the cash flow issue, the financial impact issue, to put the risk on a more balanced manner, let's say, in jurisdictions where contract adaptation is allowed, of course. So, as DRBF, our second input out of this was the importance of standing dispute boards, because those boards were proactively working and giving decisions, opening the project's way, and making the project continue. We have also, by analogy, experienced the opposite. In projects where parties did not care to establish their boards, they had to take a very long time in order to appoint, and in order to start the process and make the dispute board acquainted with the process and so on and so forth. So it was a good indication of use your dispute boards principle. And lastly, we also have seen another phenomenon, if I may call it, was that the sample effect of previous dispute board decisions. So once this issue was brought before the boards and some projects started to have some decisions on price adjustment or contract adaptation matters, the other projects, even if they did not yet have a dispute board decision or dispute board in place, taking it as an example to solve the issue between the parties. So it had a direct impact, it had an indirect impact to the whole process. Sorry for taking too long, but I think it was important to highlight a couple of matters.
Thank you, Yasemin. It's no problem. Very clear. And let me share some additional information. As you know, I am a dispute board practitioner as well. And when pandemics appear, I saw we changed our position and we took the role of mediators, basically trying to come to the parties while we were trying to find out solutions that were not coming from the contract, unfortunately. So following that idea, I would like to ask you if, under your viewpoint, the dispute board developed a general opinion about the increase of prices and how to deal with that.
So, okay. Of course, there's a short answer and there's a long answer. I'll try to make something in between. So, first of all, maybe it's a regional misapproach to the thing. I would firstly like to mention that the dispute board is, of course, empowered to consider and decide on matters. For example, if the contract is silent on contract adaptation matters, the dispute board is also empowered to look at the legal remedies that is existent at the applicable law. So that was one of the misconceptions that I have noted regionally, not only in my country or so, and in a way that this sole legal remedy cannot be imported to the contract, and the dispute boards do not have jurisdiction, and so on and so forth. This is, of course, unless the contract forbids. So it says that you cannot refer to additional legal remedies, which is another case, the dispute boards will be entitled to look at the matter. Of course, it brought a practical consideration. This was a purely legal concept. And in these matters specifically, the practical issue of choose your dispute board multidisciplinary as well came into the table as well. So in any given project, you may need to deal with legal issues as well as technical issues, and hence we were reverting back saying that it's better if you have like let's say 2 technical members of your board, but also a legal member, so that you ensure in case you have a legal question, and this was a very purely legal question, you deal with the question properly. And last point, however, and maybe this is back to Richard, this also demonstrated the difference between common law and continental law approaches. So in some limited examples that English law was applicable, it wasn't an easy case at all, and sometimes it was an impossible case to revert to law for any additional remedies, for which, as I understand, but I'm not a common law lawyer, perhaps the frustration, as Richard has stated, and the termination of the contract overall could be considered as a solution, but not the contract adaptation like the continental systems.
Thank you, Yasemin. And I would like to go back about something that you mentioned before, the active roles of the dispute boards during the pandemic. In some sense, was related to fulfill what the contracts couldn't foresee. So in terms of contracts and moving forward, I would like to ask you, Vincent, what has been the most frequently used provisions in FIDIC contracts for dealing with COVID-19 pandemics and the increasing of construction prices for after pandemics? There are two words over there. What can you tell us about it?
Yes, Alex, I hope my connection will be okay. We will see. Yeah, in our contract, actually, initially when the COVID pandemic did occur, many people were immediately thinking about using our force majeure provisions or our exceptional event provisions in the 2017 edition of Red, Yellow, and Silver books. So there was this kind, of automatic reflex to say this is for my force majeure, so let's go for the remedy under the contract. And this echoes, of course, what Richard was mentioning, force majeure provisions we have in our contract. That's a French term, but that does reflect the principle that whenever there is an event causing prevention of performance, and that event must be exceptional, of course, certain remedies can be defined. Under French law, for example, the remedy is only to have time, so you are excused of your performance. Under our FIDIC contract, that goes a little bit further because we treat man-made events differently. We allow for a cost and time remedy for certain man-made events, in particular war. And we'll come back to that regarding Ukraine war. But strictly speaking, for COVID, there was, of course, no other relief provided than a time extension. You have, under our clause 19.1 in 99 edition or 18.1 in 2017 edition, to go through a 4-step test. And if you succeed in that 4-step test, and you also additionally show that you've been prevented to perform your obligation, then you can get a relief, being time only in the particular case of COVID. But we have another provision which is and which was very much more used in the context of COVID, which is under clause 13.6 in 99 edition and 13.7, sorry, in 99 edition and 13.6 in 2017, which is adjustment for changes in legislation. It's basically a subcategory of exceptional event that we treat differently under our contract, and we provide for a cost and time relief whenever there is a change in law. law is very broadly and widely defined under our contract. It's not only legislation, it also covers regulations and bylaws. And therefore, all of the government orders we have seen across the world for closure of border, for lockdowns, for curfews, as long as they were then impacting the execution of works on a particular job site, were then giving an entitlement for the contractor to claim for cost and time. And this has been by far the most frequently used clause for all COVID-related claims because of that both time and cost relief. And you could use it also in connection with the health and safety measures which were being implemented wherever local authorities were deciding that you were allowed to resume work on site, but only at the condition that you were implementing the right health and safety measures with face masks, sanitizers, social distancing. And then you could also rely on that change in law provision to say we have now that order or that decree which is providing for us to perform those health and safety, adapt to those health and safety new recommendations. And that was also entitling the contractors to claim for cost and time relief, plus other provision that we have, like in the Yellow Book, for example, in clause 5.4, whenever there is a change in the standards of execution of the works, you can treat that as a variation. And it was also used in connection with the health and safety measures. Finally, we have some other provisions like subclause 8.5d or in 2017 edition, which is 8.4d in the past in the 99 edition, which provides for an express right for claiming an extension of time for completion in case of unforeseeable shortages in the availability of goods and personnel. But this one is only providing a time relief. So again, by far, clause 13.6 in 2017 edition, adjustment for changes in legislation, has been the most widely used. And then when turning to the post-pandemic, when we had the resumption, the restart of the economies and this big peak of demand, which caused a lot of issues in terms of shortage of supplies because of transportation issues, shipment, etc. And then as a result, also the inflation that we've been going through, we have an adjustment for changes in cost provision, which is embedded in our contract. And that's also one big difference, I would say, between a truly international form of contract, like FIDIC forms, where you have, as part of the general conditions, change in law provisions, change in cost provision with price escalation formula, that's embedded in, because anyone working internationally knows that whenever you are working in country A or B, you can be exposed to situations where the legal and regulatory environment is fragile or is evolving quickly, and the same for the economic environment with the increase of cost. And so therefore, those two provisions being in our contract, that made it, of course, quite useful for people to navigate through those periods of time. So for the inflation, the price escalation formula, I would say, unfortunately, it is as good as the formula is, because it all depends on which indices you choose. Because if you have an index which is only updated every 6 months, for example, it may not be able to capture the huge fluctuations of cost we had. You remember with the start of the Ukraine war, the price of steel in Europe went from 900 euro per ton in February 2022 to 1,800 1 month after. And of course, if your index was updated in December and then in June, you may lose, of course, a lot of these very big fluctuations, which may just hit you at the time you place your steel orders. But at least the provision is there. And also in connection specifically with the war, we have, as I said in introduction of my statement, we have specific treatment of war as an exceptional event, which is providing for time and cost relief as an exceptional event and when it prevents your performance. So say you were a contractor working in France and ordering steel from Mariupol steel factory in Ukraine, and then because of the war, your steel delivery could not be performed anymore, and you had to change and to go to another supplier, or to go to Turkey, or to go to Greece, or to go to the USA or to China, the cost incurred and the time lost in doing so could be recovered through the exceptional event provision, right? Because we are talking about a temporary impossibility to perform, but still an impossibility to perform. And all this was summarized in 3 guidance memorandum that we published on FIDIC website, and I recommend those who are interested to go and have a look. You can go to FIDIC website to publications, and you will see there a specific area where you can download our guidance memorandum. We published 3, one in 2020 for dealing with COVID pandemic in the frame of our works contracts, another one in 2021 for doing the same through our services agreements. And in 2023, we published a guidance memorandum for dealing with the inflation period experienced in the end of 2021, plus the Ukraine war. And in practice, I've seen those memorandum often used in dispute resolution forum, like dispute board, or in arbitration, and raised by either party in support of their contentions.
Thanks, Vincent. And I would like to ask you a technical question regarding FIDIC provisions. At the beginning, we moved from force majeure clause in 19.1 to the change in law, 13.7. But if you compare the versions 1999 with the versions 2017 regarding the concept of change in law, you see that in the case of 1999, if I remember, the contractor had the entitlement to get compensation for actual and potential future damages or losses. That text that doesn't appear in the case 2000 version 2017. So if you compare in the situation of pandemics, you had two chances: going in the way of the force majeure, or in the change in law. In the change in law, if you were in the version 1919, you had the chance to claim for actual or potential losses. Do you think that this position had an advantage compared with the clause, for force majeure clause?
Well, whether you are in force majeure clause in 99 or exceptional event clause in 2017, for the pandemic, the relief is the same. It will be time only. And under the clause 13.7 in 99 edition, 13.6 in 2017, we have similar relief in that case. We are talking about cost capital C, which is a defined term, and this is defined as being the cost reasonably incurred or to be incurred by the contractor. So basically, there is a sense of loss actually incurred. Of course, that's the principle. It's based on substantiation of your actual cost incurred, but also the future one that you may already foresee, as long as there is certainty on cost to be incurred, basically, that is claimable. I would say the only slight difference that you find now with the new change in law provision we have in clause 13.6 in 2017 edition is that we have also an entitlement for variation. Whenever the change in law is causing a change to the execution of the works, which is typically what can happen with the health and safety measures, which were to be implemented. So along that line, you can go for a variation in this case, and a variation, of course, will not only entitle you to cost, but to cost plus profit. First of all, you would look at whether you can use some existing rates to adjust an existing rate so as to price that variation. And the fallback option, if you cannot do so, is to price your variation on the basis of cost plus profit.
Perfect. Thanks, Vincent. The conversation is very interesting, but we are consumed almost all the time, so we have more or less 10 minutes, and I have to go forward and very quickly again with Richard. In 3 words, Claudio Solomon, the president of the ICC International Court of Arbitration. All we know here, in her last visit to America, flagged that arbitration processes in construction represent on average 40% of the total. I think that is much than this. And the most frequent cases were adjustment of prices. Considering that the public and private sector implemented mechanism of compensation in case of price escalation, what is your interpretation of this symptom? What would you recommend to reduce a conflict that it is still growing?
3 words. I actually don't think it has grown. I think it's the same old arguments in the same way. I think that actually what Yasemin has mentioned and what FIDIC has with dispute boards outside of the UK and a couple of common law jurisdictions is fundamental to resolving those and getting to arbitration. In the UK, we have one word, adjudication. It's adjudication in the UK deals with 90% plus of those financial disputes. It's quick, it's dirty, we all know it is, it's an awful system, but it keeps the cash flowing. And they copied it. Hong Kong's about to go live with theirs. Ireland has cash flow. Canada, certain states and provinces in Canada do, etc. So it's just, I think those kind of quick fix adjudication, dispute boards, adjudication that keep the money flowing through those projects, avoids those bigger disputes, and it also keeps the cash flowing, which keeps down the level of insolvencies and bankruptcies as well.
The role of the adjudicators.
And dispute board members.
Perfect. Thanks. And Yasemin, regarding what we could did and what not, does the DRBF any insight analysis or self-evaluation about what the dispute boards could do better after pandemics? Some lesson learned to share?
Well, we definitely have, and as I have conveyed previously, we have been through this, and we are still going through this learning curve, let's say. And to take action fast, and also to demonstrate the competence and ability of the dispute boards in place when there is urgent need by the audience. And maybe a last 2 points actually. Now we are also running a survey with Queen Mary. Maybe you already had participated to the survey, and the results will be analyzed, and probably this issue taking huge part of the last 2 years practices all around the world will also give us good input, and we will be updating our database accordingly. And my last point is going to be, and a little bit reply to all we discussed, is what to do next point. Because now for the new contracts, we lost the argument of unforeseeability. We can really foresee what could come because we are still in it basically. So, and also as we are, liaising with banks and we are making contract negotiations now, although we lost this part of the contract, we may still continue. What Vincent was saying was fully correct. I fully agree. We may still continue using the force majeure related structure in case there is a force majeure impact. And also we will probably see more and more adjustment in cost contractual mechanisms adapted to the contract, as opposed to dealing with additional legal remedies, whether they can be resorted to, whether they exist at all at the applicable law, such as common law sort of issues. So now is the high time to concentrate on drafting the contracts very, very carefully.
Perfect. Interesting too. Vincent, in your case, In terms of FIDIC feedback, the clauses, under your opinion, proved to be solid enough, or there are some changes to consider to introduce in future editions of FIDIC forms?
Well, I think it will be probably for the market to tell, but from the feedback that we got so far and the application of our forms through those difficult times, the feedback is that contract machinery are proved to be quite robust to deal with those events, in the sense that with the change in law provisions, change in cost provision in the price escalation formula, plus our force majeure / exceptional event provisions, there's been already a good solid machinery to deal with all this. The net is quite wide, so we can capture quite a wide range of events, and by definition, those provisions are made to capture things which are unforeseen, which are exceptional. And so in practice, it has worked quite well. I think for the price revision formula, this is more down to the engineering of the formula itself, and it's really a project by project basis. So, but maybe something we could consider doing in future is to provide more guidance as to example of formulas, because, you know, we have one standard formula, which is a simple one, which works on many projects, but that applies throughout the execution of the works, while of course your cost structure will differ whether you are in the design phase of the project, the procurement phase, or the works execution. You may have otherwise some awkward situations whereby you have a price formula which is very much impacted by the price of steel, and I had that on a couple of projects, and the price of steel went up very high at the downstream end of the project when the procurement was done already, and so the contractor was, luckily for them in that case, benefiting from a very good price increase, but which was not at all reflecting an actual cost increase, and the other way around, of course. So engineering is key in this sense for the formula. So we could consider providing guidance, maybe more guidance in this respect. But apart from that, no, because as I said earlier on, the mechanism we have already in place in our contract is something that you generally do not find in national forms of contract. I've worked with many contractors in France or elsewhere who were quite seeing the difference on their domestic contract with no particular remedy for the pandemic, for example, and a FIDIC contract where they had a change in law provision. So that's it in a nutshell.
Thanks, Vincent. And I would like to remark some ideas in the last part of this webinar. Difference between the common law and civil law countries about the treatment of compensation for contractor. That is an interesting point. The active roles of the dispute boards during the pandemics, completing or interpreting what the contracts couldn't foresee. The avoidance dimension. How to increase the role of the adjudicators and dispute boards, keeping the money flowing. Contractual mechanism of adjustment or adaptation of prices in contractual models. We are almost finishing, so I would like to ask you all the last question in 1 minute, please, to finish as an English breakfast. Do you think that it's necessary to reshape the contract's risk allocation in order to adapt them to face the post-pandemic stage, or is just enough to amend some clauses keeping the current balance and structure? Or in other words, it's now requiring in post-pandemic times a new philosophy of risk allocation in construction contracts, or just amend some clauses? Maybe ladies first in this case, Yasemin.
So I will not be able to answer it fast. Very, very briefly, I think, as Vincent was saying, case by case basis, because timing is important, technical details are important, and also the project itself is important in terms of impact. It is for sure that the stability era has ended, and accordingly, the drafting will change in order to have taken that into account. But a drastic change, I'm not sure. We are already equipped with the relevant mechanisms.
Perfect. One vote for reshaping. Richard, what do you think?
No. That's my short answer.
That was good.
Very
Something
precise.
jumped into my brain, though, about how contracts change. When I first started this job, one of the clauses we had in the standard JCT contract in the 1998 form and the 1980 form was a provision for time for ionizing radiation, which, for those who've forgotten what that is, that's a nuclear explosion from a nuclear war. It's gone now, but actually the terrorism covers come back. Contracts flex. We had provisions in which I saw in the UK, COVID clauses appear. They've all gone now. All the COVID clauses that came have gone, and we've moved on. The contracts flex. As long as you got force majeure, as long as you got some of these provisions, we've largely dealt with it. It's tinkering around the edges.
Okay, so
You've got to be a smart negotiator, really.
yeah, in some sense you're right. And Vincent, do you have a dissident vote, or what do you think?
I have the same short answer as Richard. No. And just to expand a little bit, of course, you know, when you have crises like that coming over, there is instantly, I would say, many people in the industry will tend to say, okay, we have to adjust everything, we have to change everything, we have to change our thinking, our approach, etc. But with the benefit of insight and the retrospective view on what happened, you can see, as I said, that the contract machinery we have in FIDIC contract is solid enough to deal with all this. There are some interesting general questions, though, which can be floated. Richard mentioned about provision we have under French law for hardship under Article 1195 of the Civil Code here. It's a new provision for private law contracts. For public law, it's been around for 100 years. And it basically provides that whenever there are changed circumstances which make the performance of obligation excessively onerous compared to what was anticipated at the time of contract formation, then a relief can be provided or the contract can be terminated, etc. There are various relief of that kind. But basically, you could go for an adjustment to the contract. That's subject to certain threshold, however, defined by case law. So that can be something interesting to consider. Some civil law countries have a general hardship provision like that at law. That's part of the things we are discussing, you know, in FIDIC in the frame of our future edition. That's part of the topics that are brought for thinking and brainstorming as to whether we should go that direction or not. Or also another regular question coming to us is, since we have provided for cost relief for exceptional man-made events, why not doing the same for exceptional natural events? So I don't anticipate that we would be going into those directions in the near future, but that's still open for discussion. And somehow also we have to be careful not to go to another extreme, which sometimes people are keen to push us to, is to go for a kind of cost plus contract. And whatever happens, the contractor charge the actual cost plus a fee for overhead and profit, which to me is not at all the solution going forward for many, many reasons. But one of them being, of course, the difficulty of cost control, reasonableness of cost. And then you end up also on something which is in terms of administration extremely heavy to handle. So yes, it sounds to be risk-free, but I do not find this to be the right way forward for the industry. So probably from our side, no change, and maybe some thinking about general hardship provision to the most.
Thank you, thank you. I love your expression, contract machinery. It's nice, and I think that maybe we could go to an intermediate position in terms. So maybe the contract framework is good enough to resolve what could arise. But maybe the point here is the intelligence to use the contract provisions. It's not a matter to change the provisions, but also how are we going to use those provisions. So thank you very much, Yasemin, Richard, and Vincent, for your participation. It was very, very interesting, this conversation. We could keep speaking too much time, but we don't have more time enough. You provide us very interesting concept and thoughts as usual. Finally, I will let you with Andine for the closing remarks, and thanks again for your participation.
Thank you, Alex.
Thank you, Alex. Thank you, everyone, for joining today's webinar. If you wish to keep in touch with CICA, which I hope, you can follow us on social media and on our website. The position paper will be soon available on it. And if you have any questions, feel free to send me an email or to CICA. I will put the emails in the chat. So thank you again, Yasemin, Vincent, and Richard, for your insight today. Thank you, Alex, for the great moderation. And thank you all for joining. I wish you a nice afternoon, nice day, or a good night.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you all. Thank you.